And now we are at the point to work the heel. Grab a couple of stitch markers. I have these cute ones made out of clay I made a few years back, and they're fun. So the reason why you'll need a couple of stitch markers is it just makes it easier when working the heel to not have to count and think as much about our stitches. The stitch markers really give us the indication of what we need to work when. So you'll need a couple of stitch markers, and what we want to do is start by knitting 8. And then we are going to place a stitch marker, and we are going to knit 14. And then we are going to place our second stitch marker, and then we will knit 8. So we have worked half of the stitches in the round. We've worked 30 total stitches. These are the stitches where we will do our short rows for the heel. So the rest of the stitches can just hang out back here. We're not going to work them right now. Our next step will be to turn our work. And then what we want to do is, with the yarn in front, we are going to slip that first stitch purlwise. Next, and this is called a German short row heel, and it's worked a little bit differently, but I find it to be simplistic. But next we will pull the yarn up and over the right needle. And if you notice, we've now created what is called a double stitch here. We have 2 strands instead of 1. So you want to pull up and over that needle tightly so that you have 2 strands instead of 1. So if you want to see that again, I just simply pull that up, and now we've got a double stitch. Then we will bring our yarn back between the needles, keeping that tension tight because we don't want any holes in the heel. So keep a decently tight tension. And now we are going to purl across. As we work our way across, every single time simply slip those stitch markers as you go. Slip that marker. Now that we've purled across the rest of the row, we will turn our work. And now we are going to do the same thing as we did before, but we're doing it knitwise. But what we will do is we will bring our yarn to the front. So we always bring our yarn to the front in order to slip this first stitch, and we will slip the first stitch purlwise, and then once again we will be pulling that yarn pretty tight in order to make that double stitch. So as you see, there are 2 bars if we pull that yarn. Then we will keep that tension tight, leaving our double stitch, and we will knit across this row. However, we are going to stop right before the previous double stitch that we created. So we will knit until the double stitch, slipping our markers as we go. The nice thing about working in short rows this way is it's pretty easy to keep track of those double stitches. They're really noticeable from your regular stitches. So we get all the way to here, and this is our double stitch. We are not going to work that yet. We are going to turn our work, and then with the yarn in front, slip purlwise, pull up to create another double stitch, bring the yarn back to the front between the needles, and purl across. We will be repeating these steps, working all of the stitches between on the ends of the markers until they are all created to be double stitches. And so we're going to purl and stop before the double stitch of the previous row. So right here is my double stitch. I'll purl until I reach that double stitch. Then I will turn my work, and with the yarn in front, I'm going to slip one, bring that up and over to create another double stitch, and then I will knit across and stop before the double stitch of the previous row. Now, as you can see, as I come up on the end of the row, we can identify that this and this one are double stitches. We will knit until those double stitches and turn. So continue to work this way until all the stitches on the right of the stitch marker and the left of the left stitch marker are created to be double stitches. Now as I work my way across, I'm actually working the very last stitch now from the left of the stitch marker, and I will be turning and also putting that one into a double stitch. So now I've completed all of my double stitches to one side of my stitch marker. I'll still slip that stitch marker and purl to my next double stitch. And on this side, here comes the same thing. I'll slip my stitch marker. I'm going to work the last stitch on the other side of that stitch marker, and now I'm going to turn my work and make that last stitch on this side of the stitch marker into a double stitch. And then I'm going to slip my stitch marker and I'm going to knit. And notice at this point we have everything from the left and the right of the stitch markers. They are now double stitches. So now we are going to work across our double stitches once we get to them at this point. So we have our double stitches here, and now we're working across a knit until the next stitch marker, and everything on the other side of that stitch marker is a double stitch. So once we get to our double stitches, we will still slip that stitch marker. And now we are going to decrease our double stitches by essentially knitting them together. So we're going to knit across these double stitches by knitting that double stitch together. So now it's just an individual stitch. So knit the double stitches together. And now we are going to continue to work across our back stitches. We're not going to turn here. We are going to work across the back stitches around to our starting point. And these stitches will all be in knit for this pattern. So we're going to knit across these back 30 stitches back to our beginning of the round. And now we are at the beginning of our round. We'll turn. And we still have some double stitches to work because This side of the stitch marker is still double stitches. These are the ones we just knit together, but these ones here, as you can see, are still double stitches. So what we will want to do is also knit those together. So we're actually going to be doing another round all the way around, but as we work around, we are going to knit together all the double stitches. And of course, I made it tight on purpose, and now it's hard to get into that first one, but the good news is that if you do get it tight, you're not going to have the gaps. Oh my goodness, there we go. All right. Ooh, stay on there. I want to make sure I get through both of those strands as I knit these two together. My yarn's splitting just a little as I do this because I did them so tight, but it is worth a little bit of struggle here to make sure that we don't have any gaps or holes with this heel. And when you get to your stitch marker, once again, we simply just want to slip that. We're going to keep these here because we'll still be using them for a little while longer. And now for the rest of the round, we're simply just going to knit all the way around back to the beginning of the round. So now that I have worked around again and we have no more double stitches on our needles, we will now be working more double stitches, but in a different way. So to start this row, because we will be going back to working in rows, we did 2 rounds and now we're back to working in rows, and we're going to work some more fun double stitches. We are going to knit across until our second marker. And now that we've reached our second marker, we are going to slip it, knit the next stitch after that second marker, and then turn. And I'm sure you can guess what we're going to do now. Now we are going to take this last stitch worked and we are going to slip it and work that double stitch in the same way that we did before. So we're going to create that double stitch, slip our marker, and then work our way back to our other marker. Now that we purl to our other marker, we will slip that marker, purl 1, and turn. And then of course, this last stitch that we just worked, we are going to create a double stitch on the knit side. And then we will slip our marker and work our way back to the other marker. So now we're working our double stitches going kind of in the opposite way. We're going to be working our double stitches out from each stitch marker. But the cool thing is that our double stitches are pretty easy to identify. You can leave your stitch markers in if you feel that you need to know that you're coming up on some double stitches. But as you can see, as I work to my stitch marker, we can see a double stitch right there. So if I wanted to, I could remove my stitch markers because they are easy to identify now on either side which double stitches we will be working to.
Wrong side facing. I'm going to make my...
So for me, I am going to go ahead and take out my stitch marker because I can see where my double stitches are. And when I get to this double stitch, I will knit that double stitch together. If I don't split my yarn here. and then knit one more and turn. And then of course we'll make that first one a double stitch and purl back to our next double stitch. So each time we're going to be working farther out on the row in terms of double stitches. So here I am. I'm going to go ahead and remove my marker because I can see where my double stitch is, and I will purl that double stitch together, purl one more and turn, and then create a double stitch, and then knit my way back to the double stitch on the other side, and I will repeat that until I've worked all my stitches out. So here I am coming up on that double stitch. I will simply knit it together, knit the next one, and turn. So see, not so scary. These German short rows are not so scary to create a nice heel. Now if this were going to be a heel that we were to wear, I would have designed it slightly different because I'm not actually doing as many short rows as we normally would for a heel that we would wear. I would have divided those beginning stitch markers a little bit differently, but since this is more decor, we don't need as much room in the heel because it's just for decoration, so it lays a little bit better if we don't put a lot of rows into that heel as if we were to wear it. So I purl my double stitch together, purl my next stitch, and turn. And we'll just keep working in that way where we create double stitch from our last stitch worked, knit across to the next double stitch, knit that together and knit one more, and then turn and repeat. So now that I have gone all the way across, I will work them all. I have my last yarn in front, my last double stitch to make on this side, and now I will knit across to the next double stitch, which was my last one on the purl side previously. And as I get to that last double stitch on this side, I won't be turning after I knit it together. So I'm going to knit it together, and then I'm going to work around the instep, around the back side of our work. And we still, yes, we still have one more double stitch over here hanging out, and we will get to that one. But we're finishing up, increasing out to our sides for these double stitches. So I will simply work all the instep stitches across. Which these instep stitches are simply a knit stitch. I kind of planned this to be similar to the others where we kind of take a break in between patterns and do some rows of knit and purl. That way that heel is intentionally placed in between our knit and purl patterned work. I think it looks nice and clean that way. Plus it makes it a little bit easier when we're doing the heel. We don't have to worry about patterning stitches across the instep. So making it a bit easier on ourselves. Now as we turn back to the beginning of the round, we are going to be continuing to work in the round, but like I said, we still have one more double stitch to work. It's right here. So we will go ahead and knit that last double stitch together. Of course, I did it pretty tight. That way we don't have any gaps or holes. And now we will simply knit to the beginning of the round again, and your heel, your German short row heel, is complete, which is super fun because now we can move back to our patterned work and create some nice pretty knit and purl stitches that make a beautiful design. So go ahead and finish knitting this around the beginning of the round, and then we will pause for a minute and start our next section.